मत कर, ये गलत कर रहे हो, निकलना। भाई ऐसा मत कर, हिंदू आ गया भाई। भाई ऐसा मत कर।
Friends, a Hindu sannyasi who had dressed in the traditional attire of an ascetic, suddenly walked into the mosque. As soon as the Muslims saw him, they began exchanging glances, their faces filled with surprise and confusion. What was this man doing here in the mosque, and what was his purpose? It was iftar time, and the Muslims were busy preparing to break their fast. The plates of dates and other food were ready, and the atmosphere was filled with the anticipation of the evening meal. In the midst of this preparation, the sannyasi calmly walked into the mosque, completely unbothered by the stares of the Muslims around him. Without hesitation, he went over to the food table, picked up a date, and began eating. The Muslims, who were already in the middle of their spiritual and physical preparations for iftar, couldn't believe their eyes. Why was this Hindu sannyasi, a person of a different faith, sitting among them and eating their food? This act was so unusual that it left many people in shock. As the sannyasi continued to eat, some of the Muslims grew increasingly uncomfortable. They had never witnessed a non-Muslim in the mosque during iftar before, especially not a Hindu. A sense of confusion spread through the crowd, with whispers circulating about what his true intentions might be. What had brought him to the mosque? Was he there with a peaceful intention, or was there something else behind his presence? Some Muslims could not help but feel a sense of unease. There had been tensions between the two communities in the past, and with the mosque's sanctity being at stake, they feared that something might go wrong. Was the sannyasi there for a different purpose? As he continued to sit there, calmly eating the food, the atmosphere grew tense. A Muslim man, clearly disturbed by the situation, stepped forward to confront him. The unexpected actions of the sannyasi had stirred up an uneasy feeling, and now it seemed like there might be a confrontation. This was a mosque in India, and it was time for iftar. Several Muslims were already present, preparing to break their fast. As the evening prayers approached, an unusual sight unfolded. The door of the mosque opened, and a Hindu sannyasi, wearing traditional orange robes, entered. The moment he stepped inside, all eyes turned to him. It was rare, almost unheard of, for a non-Muslim to enter a mosque, especially during iftar, a sacred time for Muslims. The sannyasi walked in confidently, his head held high. As he entered, he greeted the Muslims around him with a calm and respectful gesture. His presence, though unusual, was not immediately hostile. However, the Muslims were visibly surprised. They had never seen a Hindu, especially one dressed as a sannyasi, enter their mosque before. His boldness seemed out of place, and a wave of confusion spread throughout the gathering. Without any hesitation, the sannyasi made his way across the mosque, greeting people as he went. It was clear that he was not in a hurry. His movements were deliberate, and his demeanor was serene, almost as if he belonged there. He walked to the area where the food was laid out for iftar. The Muslims, who had been preparing for the evening meal, watched him closely, unsure of how to react. Some whispered quietly, wondering what his intentions were. Despite their discomfort, the sannyasi remained calm and unbothered. He sat down beside the food as though he had every right to be there, and began to take dates from the plate. Muslims continued to stare, their minds racing with questions. Was he there to cause trouble? Or was he simply curious about the Ramadan rituals and the tradition of breaking the fast in the mosque? Whatever the reason, his presence was unsettling. It was unlike anything the people had experienced before. This moment would soon lead to a series of events that no one could have predicted. As the Hindu sannyasi sat among the Muslims, eating dates and conversing with some of the people, the atmosphere in the mosque became increasingly tense. The Muslims were unsure of how to react to his presence. His calmness and ease in the situation only seemed to heighten their confusion. This was a mosque, a sacred place for Muslims, and a non-Muslim, especially a Hindu sannyasi, had never been seen inside during iftar before. One of the Muslims, unable to contain his growing anger, fixed a furious stare on the sannyasi. How could he just sit here, eating their food, in their mosque, without any hesitation or fear? The question kept echoing in his mind. What was this Hindu sannyasi doing here? Was he here with a genuine purpose, or did he have ulterior motives? In a time when tensions between the two communities had been high, his sudden appearance only seemed to add to the unease. The man could not ignore the historical context. There had been incidents in the past where mosques had been targeted, and there were always rumors of unrest between Hindus and Muslims. The thought that the sannyasi might be here to cause trouble crossed his mind. Was he attempting to provoke the Muslims, or was he here for something more sinister? Unable to shake the feeling of discomfort, the man slowly moved closer to the sannyasi, his expression hardening with suspicion. His anger grew as he watched the sannyasi sit there so comfortably, unaware or perhaps indifferent to the discomfort his presence was causing. With every passing moment, the sense of unease among the Muslims grew stronger, and soon whispers began to circulate in the mosque. What should they do about this unexpected guest? The situation was spiraling, and it seemed as if something needed to be done. The tension in the room was palpable, and it was clear that this situation could not go on without a resolution. As the minutes passed, the tension in the mosque became unbearable. The sannyasi, oblivious to the unease around him, continued to sit calmly and eat dates, chatting occasionally with those around him. The Muslim man, who had been staring at him with growing suspicion, finally could not hold his anger any longer. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding, and walked over to the sannyasi. With a stern look on his face, the Muslim confronted the Hindu sannyasi. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice laced with irritation. "You are a Hindu. This is a mosque. By whose permission have you entered here?" His words were sharp, demanding an explanation. The sannyasi, who had been calmly enjoying his meal, looked up, a slight surprise crossing his face at the sudden confrontation. The Muslim man was furious. "You haven't been fasting. You don't belong here. This space is for Muslims who have fasted throughout the day and are now breaking their fast," he continued, pointing at the food. "You have no right to sit here and eat our food. Get up and leave." The sannyasi, still calm, tried to explain himself. "I'm not here to cause any harm. I simply wanted to share this moment of peace with you. I am hungry, and I thought you might allow me to eat with you, just for one meal." His voice was soft, almost pleading, but the Muslim man wasn't listening. His anger and suspicion only grew stronger. "You don't belong here," the Muslim man repeated. "You're a Hindu sannyasi. You don't have a place in this mosque. You must leave now." The words were harsh, and he was now pushing the sannyasi toward the door. Despite the sannyasi's pleas, the Muslim's anger overcame him. He believed that the mosque should not be a place for someone from a different faith, especially during such a sacred time as Iftar. The situation was escalating quickly, and the tension in the air became even thicker as the confrontation continued. The sannyasi, who appeared poor and hungry, looked at the Muslims around him with desperation. "I am poor and starving," he said, his voice trembling. "I have come here just for one meal. Could you not offer me one meal to fill my stomach?" His words were soft, almost pleading, as he stood there hoping for mercy. But the Muslim man, already agitated and suspicious of the sannyasi's intentions, was not moved. Instead, he grabbed the sannyasi by his collar with force, his grip tightening as he began pushing him towards the door. "No," he said sternly, his voice filled with authority. "This iftar is only for those who have fasted, for Muslims. You are not welcome here. Your unclean feet have no place in this mosque. You are not allowed to enter again." As the Muslim man forcefully dragged the sannyasi out, a few others who had been quietly watching the scene unfold began to speak up. "Stop," one person said, stepping forward. "This is a mosque, yes, but this man is hungry. He came here seeking food just as we did. Let him have his meal. He is a human being, and we are all brothers in need. Allah will be pleased with us for showing kindness to him." But the man who had confronted the sannyasi was adamant. He refused to listen to any pleas, his face twisted with anger. "No," he repeated. "This iftar is for those who have fasted. He has no right to eat with us." His voice grew louder as he pushed the sannyasi toward the door with even more force. "We cannot allow him here. His presence is an insult to our faith." Despite the objections from others, the Muslim man was unyielding. He was determined to protect what he believed to be the sanctity of the mosque, insisting that only those who had fasted had the right to partake in the iftar. The scene grew tense and the people around them were divided. Some watched in silence while others tried to intervene, But the confrontation seemed unstoppable. One of the Muslims, who had become far too enraged, could no longer control himself. In a fit of fury, he began to strike the sannyasi relentlessly. He slapped him hard across the face, pulled his hair, and shoved him violently down the stairs of the mosque. The sannyasi, disoriented and in pain, struggled to regain his balance. The Muslims who had been standing nearby quickly rushed to intervene, trying to stop the man's aggression. "This is wrong," one of them shouted, stepping forward. "It's wrong, especially while fasting. If he eats just a little bit, it won't affect our meal. It won't take away from what we have. Why are you being so harsh?" But the angry Muslim, consumed by his rage, didn't listen. He glared at the sannyasi and continued to push him. "No!" he screamed. "These Hindus have always oppressed us, caused us suffering. They've always been a threat to our peace. We can't let him stay here. We can't let him disrespect us like this." His words echoed through the mosque, and others began to gather around, watching the scene unfold. Some were upset by the Muslims' actions, while others stood in silent confusion, not knowing what to make of the situation. The tension in the air grew thicker by the second. Despite the objections from those trying to calm him down, the angry Muslim remained unyielding. His words were filled with anger and frustration, as he believed that the sannyasi's presence was an insult to their faith and to their sacred time of fasting. His hostility seemed to stem not only from the sannyasi's actions, but also from the long history of tension between the two communities. In the corner of the mosque, the imam sat silently, praying. He looked on with a pained expression, uncertain of how to handle the situation. Who could be responsible for such behavior? He had always taught that the mosque should be a place of peace and unity, not conflict and violence. The sannyasi had fallen down the stairs, his lips torn and bleeding. Blood began to trickle from his mouth as he struggled to speak. "Fine," he said weakly, his voice filled with pain and sadness. "If you don't want to let me break my fast here, then I will leave. I thought perhaps that you, the followers of Allah, would show kindness to me, a poor soul, and let me have one meal. I have been wandering for days, hungry, with no food to eat." His voice trembled as he continued. "I thought that if my own God couldn't give me food, maybe your God would not turn me away in this mosque." His words, filled with sorrow and desperation, cut through the hearts of some of the Muslims who had been watching the scene unfold. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and it stirred something deep within them. The sannyasi, bruised and bleeding, stood there, looking at them with pleading eyes, as though he had lost all hope. Upon hearing his words, a few Muslims could no longer stay silent. They immediately rushed forward and confronted the man who had been pushing the sannyasi. "What are you doing?" one of them shouted. "Why are you treating him like this? It's Ramadan, a month of mercy. Why are you pushing him away? This is a time for kindness, not cruelty. Why are you making him suffer? You are wrong, and you should be ashamed of yourself." The man, who had been so consumed by his anger, stopped for a moment, realizing the truth in what was being said. His grip on the sannyasi loosened slightly, but his anger was still visible. The man who had stepped forward continued, "This is the month of mercy, the month to earn rewards. You should not be treating anyone like this, especially not someone in need. Let him eat. He is a guest here, hungry and desperate. We should show compassion, not rejection." The words of the Muslim struck a chord with those around them. A few others stepped forward as well, urging the angry man to reconsider. "Please let him stay," one of them pleaded. "Allah will be pleased with us if we show mercy." As the situation continued to escalate, the Muslims who had been watching the scene now turned their attention to the man who had been aggressively pushing the sannyasi out. Some of them began reprimanding him. "Are you out of your mind?" one of them exclaimed. "You're a Muslim, just like us, and yet you're kicking this Hindu out of the mosque. How can you act this way and claim to be right?" The anger and frustration were evident in their voices as they spoke. The Muslim who had been forcefully trying to remove the sannyasi from the mosque stood there, visibly surprised by the backlash. He tried to defend himself, saying, "I'm just protecting the sanctity of the mosque. This is a sacred place and he doesn't belong here." But the other Muslims didn't agree. "No," one of them said firmly, You're wrong. You have no right to treat him like this. He may follow a different religion, but he is our guest. A guest is a blessing, and as guests, they are entitled to kindness and respect. He's hungry, and he came here hoping for mercy, just like any other human would. How can you turn him away like this? Some of the others who had been standing by now stepped forward and began to move the sannyasi back toward the mosque. No, you're not leaving, one of them said gently. You will stay here and break your fast with us. You're welcome to stay. We, as Muslims, have failed to show you the kindness that we should have. They spoke with compassion, urging the sannyasi to stay. To the angry Muslim, they said, we apologize for his behavior. It was wrong, and we should have acted differently. Please forgive us. He was just angry, but we realize now that we should have shown mercy. Our faith teaches us to be kind, and that's what we should have done. The words seemed to calm the sannyasi, and he was gently led back into the mosque, where he could finally join the iftar and eat. The other Muslims who had intervened exchanged looks, knowing that, in the end, compassion and understanding had prevailed. The angry Muslim, still furious, stood firm and said, I will not sit where this sannyasi sits to have iftar. I will not share my meal with him. But the others, who had gathered around, responded calmly but firmly. This is the house of God. This is a mosque, a sacred place. If you wish to leave, then go ahead. But ask yourself, how will you show your face here again to pray after treating a guest this way? The angry Muslim's face tightened in frustration, but the words of the others seemed to carry weight. He hesitated for a moment, but the reality of the situation was sinking in. He had been so caught up in his anger that he hadn't realized the bigger picture, the importance of showing kindness and humility in the face of a fellow human's need. By this time, the sannyasi had been gently invited back into the mosque, and the iftar time had arrived. A Muslim man who had stepped forward to help sat next to the sannyasi and kindly offered him food. Please, sit here with us. Break your fast. We welcome you, he said with a soft smile. The sannyasi, still weary and shaken from the earlier confrontation, sat down, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the dates and water laid out for the meal. As they ate together, the Muslim man spoke to the sannyasi, apologizing for the harsh treatment he had received earlier. We were wrong to treat you that way. Please forgive us, he said sincerely. The sannyasi, now at peace, nodded and smiled. He knew he had been treated unfairly, but he was grateful for the kindness that had emerged in the end. As the meal came to a close, the sannyasi looked around at the people who had offered him food, shelter, and understanding. His eyes were filled with gratitude, and his heart warmed. Thank you, he said softly, his voice full of emotion. You've given me much more than just food today. You've shown me kindness and humanity, and for that, I am truly grateful. A tear welled up in his eye as he smiled at the group. His words carried deep meaning, and those who had shared the meal with him felt a sense of humility and peace. After the incident had unfolded and the crowd had gathered around, many of the people who had been involved in the situation turned to the Muslim who had been aggressive earlier. They apologized for the way things had escalated, explaining that sometimes emotions get the better of people in tense situations. You were wrong to push him out. There was no need for that, one person said. In moments of conflict, some Muslims get carried away, but we need to show patience and understanding. The sannyasi, now smiling, interrupted them with a calm expression. Today, he said softly, I have learned so much. The truth is, I am a Hindu, but I was not here for the reasons you might think. The Muslim who was angry with me, he is actually my friend. We've been making prank videos together, and we decided to visit this mosque during Ramadan just to see if a Hindu sannyasi like me would be allowed to break his fast here. We wanted to see what would happen. The revelation hit everyone like a shockwave. The people who had been involved in the situation and those who had witnessed the confrontation were stunned. The sannyasi continued, but what happened today was something I never expected. Instead of being turned away, you showed me kindness. You scolded my friend, but you gave me food and warmth, despite knowing I was from a different faith. This was not just about food, it was about humanity. Your actions, your patience, Your willingness to treat me with respect have truly amazed me." He paused, his eyes glistening with emotion. "I am now a fan of Muslims. What you did was not just a gesture of kindness, it was a true reflection of your faith." The video of what happened today has gone viral, not just in India, but across the world. People are watching, and many are deeply moved by how you treated me, a non-Muslim, with such warmth and respect. This is the image of Islam I will share with others. You have touched so many lives today. The room fell silent as the sannyasi's words settled in. His revelation had left everyone in awe of the power of kindness, understanding, and the universal message of humanity.